Welcome. Good evening. If you are indeed in a time zone where it is the evening, it's sort of the early afternoon for me. Very happy to be seeing so many of my old Dharma friends, and of course, very happy to also be meeting if we haven't met before. Hello, hello to all of you. So nice to see all of you. So we'll just give it a couple of minutes to let other people join. And because we will be starting with a meditation, uh, it is also an opportunity to find a comfortable stationary position, to arrange everything around us nicely. If you are going to be using a shawl during meditation or lying down, this is the perfect moment to arrange all of that, to make sure we have all the cups of tea we might need for this, to our exploration of meditation. Yeah, just making ourselves comfortable while we're waiting and sort of very slowly preparing for the first meditation that we're going to do, which will be all about exploring the states of relaxation and figuring out what brought us here. Why is it that we are here? What is it that we would like to eventually realize through the practice of meditation? So, once again, very happy to be here with all of you. Please use these moments to make yourselves comfortable, and we'll start meditating in just about a moment. So, we will indeed start with a meditation. And this is just a preliminary practice, which we will be coming back to again and again for other methods and for other practices that we do. This one will serve as sort of an introduction or a gentle way of preparing our body, speech, and mind so that we can meditate properly with any other technique. But for now, it is also a very good way to adjust our attentional balance or attentional plasticity so that we can indeed survive these 2 hours and actually get some benefit out of them. For some people, 2 hours on Zoom is quite a challenge, and I absolutely can relate to that given that we are all kind of developing a certain level of digital fatigue. So, whatever we can do to adjust our mental, physical, and verbal state or to harmonize the energies of body, speech, and mind in order to feel more comfortable in this exploration would be, of course, very welcome. And this practice is one of those things. So it starts with us adopting a comfortable stationary position. For many of us, that's probably upright. We are sitting somehow, either with our legs crossed or with our feet flat on the ground. If we are, for example, sitting on a chair or on the um, yeah, armchair, sofa, anything like that. So that's one option. And another option is just to lie down and to be on your back in the position very well known to most of you as Shavasana, or the corpse position, in which we're just lying flat on our back and our arms are sort of at a 30-degree angle with regards to our torso. Our legs are slightly apart. And this position is, if needed, also supported by different props like a pillow under our head and so forth, whatever it is that we need. So these are the two primary options, but if your body requires something special, something in between the two positions, or something completely different, that's totally fine as well. The ideal position would be relaxed and stable. So as long as we can find these two qualities, it's all good. And so we adopt this position. And then we bring our awareness to the body, noticing that our body has sensations and starting to observe these sensations. In particular, those arising in the parts of the body that are currently touching the ground. Noticing perhaps the sensations of firmness and stability there in those points of contact between our body and whatever is supporting us. And while observing, also inviting a sense of relaxation, allowing these body parts to start releasing some of the muscle tension that we might still be holding from our day. In our feet, in our toes, throughout our legs in general, around the pelvic floor and our buttocks. Then equally, abdomen and lower back. Spending some time with our torso, our shoulders, upper arms, the area around the elbow, forearms, hands and fingers. Then again, our shoulders, neck and throat, the back of the head, our crown, and our facial muscles. And then extending our awareness to the entirety of the body with all of its sensations. Observing them with curiosity, with openness, but without analysis, without trying to understand anything more deeply right now, and without trying to necessarily change anything. And in this process of observation, noticing that our body is relatively still. There is some movement, the heartbeat, the movements of the breath, and so forth. But generally, there's also stillness. And this stillness itself can become an object of our attention and an object of appreciation. For a little while, we can allow ourselves to just enjoy the fact that we are now relaxed and still, not dragged around by the multiple demands of our day, and by comparison, less distracted than usually. We're staying with our body right now and enjoying its stillness moment by moment. Our speech is now resting in a state of silence since we're not actively using it. We're not saying anything, not reciting anything even, just allowing it to be fully silent and therefore relaxed. And our mind is also experiencing a relative union of relaxation, stability, and clarity in that we are keeping it on the body. We're staying present with the stillness of the body and the movements of its sensations. And therefore, our mind can temporarily release thoughts related to the future, thoughts related to the past, and even analysis of the present moment. It's doing something much more simple, noticing the stillness and appreciating it. While allowing our body, speech, and mind to rest in this manner, we will very slowly explore another domain of experience in which our mind does become a bit more active. We will use a little bit of conceptual thinking, a little bit of our imagination, but in a very focused way. Essentially exploring a very simple question that, of course, would have layers to it. And the question is, what brought me here in terms of my wishes and aspirations? What are my aspirations with regards to this course and with regards to my contemplative practice in general? We could even ask, what are my highest aspirations? What would I like to eventually see realized? And then whatever it is, we can use that as our initial motivation for this course, for this class in particular, for the course in general. It's all essentially a part of our vision for what true well-being is. So, in that regard, it's definitely valid, and we can breathe life into our own wish for happiness, into our willingness to gather the causes of happiness, bringing greater intensity to it with each new natural exhalation. And saying to ourselves, yes, indeed, may this course bring about greater happiness, greater well-being for myself and for all other beings. May every moment that we spend together be meaningful, bringing something good to the web of interdependence that unites us all. Then, now that we have worked with these aspirations, we can gently release them, letting them go back into the background of our mind. And then we can come back to the body just to check in with it, noticing the sensations once again, seeing whether there's any tension now, or fatigue, or a sense of being energized. And then very slowly we can introduce a tiny bit of movement to the body. Maybe very gently rocking back and forth, maybe opening our eyes, reactivating the facial muscles, moving our fingers, moving our toes, stretching fully, bringing our awareness to the space around us, the physical space around us, and then eventually also to the digital space that we're now using as our classroom. Thank you. Um, so let's arrive back to this digital space that we're all in. Again, please be make sure you're comfortable throughout these classes. I don't have any particular expectations with regards to people keeping their cameras on or off. It's all okay. It's the evening for many people, and even if it's not, doesn't matter. I think when it comes to digital classes, we should all really be comfortable. And so, yes, absolutely feel free to do whatever works for you, as long as something flows through and brings you some benefit. And while I'm figuring out my slides situation, I would just invite all of you, if you feel like it, to use the chat and share the location that you're connecting from. Again, if it's safe and comfortable, you don't have to do it. And also, if you want your aspiration for this course, the very thing that we just explored in our meditation. Of course, there might be something very personal to it, and in that case, no need to share or don't feel pressure to share. But when it comes to something more general, if you want to share it with others, it's always very interesting for me to observe and to learn about because essentially that's something that helps me then modulate the content of the course in a proper way. All right. So I'll just move things around here so you can see the slides and my talking head at the same time. Yeah. So thank you for being here. Lovely to see such a wide array of geographical locations. I'm in Mexico City, which is where I'm based, and so um, on occasion, some sounds of the beautiful and lively city that Mexico City is might creep in. in which case that's Mexico saying hello to all of you and inviting you to come join a yoga retreat here sometime. And while we're also exchanging these aspirations, a technical announcement. Kat and I talked about our sort of curriculum for this year, the things that we're going to do with the Sangye Yoga School, very generously hosting this. And so we have this course, which I'm very excited about because it's one of my favorite things to go through. Always a great reminder for me personally to reestablish these foundational ideas related to meditation in general. And then we have another course focused on concentration practices, aka shamatha practices, or attentional training practices, you could say, in the spring. And then later, the very same year, we have a little course on yoga nidra and the practices of non-doing. So yoga nidra, as many people would know, is the practice of yogic sleep or a practice of deep yogic relaxation that is often used to just relax and distress, but that was originally envisioned as a method for bringing awareness into the states of sleep and dreaming. And so that last one will focus on doing yoga nidra ourselves, but also facilitating yoga nidra for others if we have the wish to do so. And it will be combined with a gentle exploration of these practices of complete release from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. So that's sort of an overview of our ambitious course lineup for this year. Hopefully, if you're interested in any of these will bring some sense of peace, which is all that we can hope for, really, in this day and age. So that's the general idea. And yes, thank you for supporting us by showing up and being a part of this. Yeah, and also beautiful to see the one aspiration that was shared in the chat, practice in a group and hear more on the Tibetan meditation practices. And that's kind of what this course is about. Sort of as an introductory note, yes, of course, we are in this case hosted by Sangye Yoga School, which is a yoga school. And so many of you would already be yoga practitioners. And it is quite typical for practitioners of yoga that came from the Indian subcontinent to have a meditation practice that is derived from the eightfold system that Patanjali presented in the Yoga Sutras. So when I was growing up in the post-Soviet Union, Russia, a lot of my earliest books on meditation were covering the latter stages of Patanjali's system. So, you know, that the first four steps up to pranayama are sometimes referred to as hatha yoga, and then the remaining steps sometimes referred to as raja yoga. And this is where you have pratyahara and so forth. And so it seems that in the 60s, in the former Soviet bloc and beyond that, a lot of people were trying to primarily practice with those practical instructions, originally coming from Patanjali and then going through a lineage of masters, all the way up to Samadhi. And that's still a tradition that's very much alive. But I think what I've been noticing, and this is sort of more of an anthropological commentary, is that a lot of people who do practice hatha yoga for maintaining their physical well-being or kind of making their physical body more prepared for spiritual disciplines, then when it comes to meditation, start also exploring the Buddhist tradition and what it has to offer. And this is where we're coming in with this course. There is an idea that many of you are probably already quite advanced or at least somewhat familiar with the physical aspects and breathing aspects of yoga. But then when it comes to the mind, there's a lot that the Buddhist tradition has to offer. And of course, it also comes from the Indian subcontinent and it has shared roots with Raja Yoga. So we're going to look at what the Buddhist tradition here has to offer with all of its definitions, lists, all of these different things that can make our practice very structured. And if you're primarily a practitioner of Raja Yoga, again, this might just be something to re-inspire yourself with, or to add context, if you are looking for a new style of meditation practice, this might also be of benefit in that regard. Okay, some more aspirations. I'd love to learn more about the Indo-Tibetan culture and tap into meditation. I'm very new to it. Okay, perfect. And you're in the right place, let's hope. I'd like to set up a more systematic meditation practice for myself and learn more about the Indo-Tibetan tradition in particular. Again, that's exactly what we're going to do. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing these. Another sort of thing that the course might be helpful with is that uh, for people who facilitate yoga classes, or have a full practice as a yoga teacher, sometimes, again, the meditation component might be a bit more challenging because that's a whole separate area of expertise. And so, if even to offer very short meditations, let's say at the end of an asana session or pranayama session, some people feel the need to have a more thorough basis in terms of knowing the concepts, knowing the dates, knowing the origins, knowing what different practices might entail. So this little course was also crafted as an answer to that need for professional yoga teachers or those who aspire to be facilitating yoga classes. So hopefully there's benefit in it for all of us. And for me, this is just a wonderful opportunity to revisit some of the foundational ideas because the Tibetan tradition or the Indo-Tibetan tradition very much insists on revisiting the basics again and again and again and again and again and again and again. There's a Tibetan proverb, read a text 7 times and you will develop 7 levels of understanding, which is then taken to the extreme, actually, by the great masters of the Tibetan tradition who reread their own foundational texts hundreds of times, therefore developing hundreds of levels of understanding. And even though that might not be us, we might not necessarily be willing to reread something 100 times, uh, unless we are that kind of person, which I am. I reread books hundreds of times. I don't know if that's good necessarily, but that's just something that brings me greater appreciation of the text and also calms me down. So, but if you're not this kind of person, then maybe hundreds is a little too extreme, but at least a few times is always good. And therefore, I'm so happy to see so many people who I've met before, and who I know have already looked at all of this, but who probably also learned or discovered that by even revisiting the very definition of meditation itself, we're already entering a space of deep contemplation in which we can revitalize our practice. So, with regards to this very definition, we're in part one of this course. It will consist of 6 parts or 6 classes. With regards to the very definition of meditation, here it is. Um, as many people would know, defining meditation in the Indo-Tibetan context is always easier to do if we revisit the original terms. Of course, the term meditation in the English um, understanding of it, or there in terms of colloquial English language and the daily use of it, might have about a billion different meanings. And what your friend next door calls meditation might be very different from the practices that you're doing on your cushion. But to find the commonality there and also to draw the line between what is meditation and what is not meditation, in that these practices might not be so good for you, and therefore we shouldn't really be calling them real meditation. To draw that line within the Indo-Tibetan tradition, not beyond that, because everyone is allowed to call whatever, have whatever definitions they want to have. But in order to figure out this specific part within the Indo-Tibetan tradition, 2 terms I primarily used. One is the original one, Sanskrit and Pali, because that was these are some of the earlier languages of the Buddhist tradition. And then the other one is Tibetan. So for the Pali and Sanskrit, the term that is used in the Tibetan tradition or Buddhist tradition is bhavana. It's the same in 2 languages. Sometimes there's a difference in pronunciation, like karma and kamma. There are certain differences between Pali and Sanskrit when it comes to phonetics and sounds, but this one is the same in both languages. And bhavana literally means cultivation or growing something in your garden or in the field. That's the very practical association that people in the times of the Buddha would have with that word. You can cultivate a field, you can grow your carrots or whatever it is that you want to grow. And equally, you can cultivate the field of your mind by growing something in it. And ideally, what you're growing in it would be wholesome or beneficial or healthy or reasonable or sound in that it would contribute to greater happiness, greater well-being. Why would you want to spend your time cultivating something that's not beneficial to you and others? Right? That's a valid question to ask. And so, intentional cultivation of something that is wholesome is the idea that's encoded in this term bhavana. The same applies to the Tibetan term gom, which literally translates as familiarization or habituation. So when we're practicing meditation of whatever kind, if it is real meditation from this Buddhist point of view, we are habituating our mind to something that is wholesome, good, sound, beneficial, reasonable, and therefore contributing to greater happiness and well-being for everyone. If we are habituating our mind to something that is not healthy, not wholesome, not helpful, only bringing more suffering, then that's not meditation by definition. That's not proper GOM. We are still habituating, but because it's not intentional habituation to something that is good, we shouldn't be calling that meditation. That's more indoctrination, propaganda, being brainwashed, whatever it is. Those things are also types of habituation, but they shouldn't be confused with meditation, which should be intentional and related to something that is good. So that's the definition right here in the bold. The process of habituating our minds to beneficial states or qualities or skills. And beneficial here means something leading to greater degrees of well-being for ourselves and for other beings. And the working psychological hypothesis here, which we will look at more deeply in a moment, is that we can indeed identify certain skills, qualities, states that are universally beneficial in that when we cultivate them, they definitely make us happier and they definitely contribute to the happiness of others. And this is quite shocking or quite a revelation actually in our culture sometimes because uh, we sometimes not everyone equally, but sometimes we are so focused on the moral relativism of things, which is also a valid thing to consider, that we say, oh, well, something that is good for me might be very harmful to others. Something that is beneficial to this person might also be harmful to other people. And therefore, we can never identify something that's universally good. It's always going to be this messy thing where you're trying to catch whatever is good. And while you're pursuing that good, everything else starts falling apart from everyone else. And therefore, we should all just give up and live and enjoy a life of relative enjoyment, ideally just enjoying ourselves, and then we'll die and we'll be cremated, and that's it. And that's kind of a view that we might identify either in our own mind or in the minds of others, saying, okay, that's a philosophical position that somehow found its way into my mind. And then identifying also that that philosophical position is very different from the philosophical positions that were originally offered by the Buddha and his followers and that are still practiced to this day. Because in the Buddha's philosophical position, there are things that are universally beneficial if we cultivate them, and meditation is meant for specifically that. It's not just for relaxation. It's not just to feel better about our day. It's not just to release some of the stress. It's to also cultivate something that can then radiate outwards, transforming, once again, to borrow the term from the meditation that we've already done, the web of interdependence, this invisible interconnectedness of which we are all a part. As a side note, because I skipped that slide, so I'll come back to it for a moment. There are two books that I suggest as reading for this course. You don't have to read them in order to understand what we're talking about and enjoy it and apply it in practice. But if you are a reader, then these are the two primary sources I would recommend. The one on the left by Mathieu Ricard, who is a very famous humanitarian, Buddhist monastic, photographer, also human rights activist, but also animal rights activist, and Buddhist translator. The one on the left by Mathieu Ricard is more universal in that he's not writing specifically for Buddhists about Buddhism. This book therefore became a bestseller in that it's quite universal. So you could easily give it to your friends, even if they are not interested in Buddhism, and they would probably, if they ever care to open it, still find what he is talking about relatable. So that's a great introduction. And of course, Mathieu Ricard is an intellectual and an incredibly cultured uh, thinker, and therefore his writing is really, really enjoyable, at least for me. So it's also just a delight to visit. He has many wonderful books. This is one of them. And it's relatively short also. So that's a great intro. But the one on the right by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who's one of my primary teachers, is much more deeply focused on the Buddhist tradition and in particular the Indo-Tibetan tradition of training. So that one will have ample references to Buddhism, and in fact, it's just a Buddhist book. So it would not be probably appropriate as a gift to your friends who are not at all interested in Buddhism and actually have some aversion towards it, perhaps. But it's a great source for understanding the source material and approaching it in a non-colonial way, where we don't pretend that any of this was invented by white people on the east coast of the United States. And when we acknowledge very clearly that all of this still primarily belongs to the original lineage holders, the Indians and the Tibetans, in this case for the Indo-Tibetan tradition, and to other Buddhist communities throughout Asia for other traditions, and that we are merely guests who are welcome at this feast, but still in the capacity of guests primarily. We are in the early stages of adopting all of this material, so paying close attention to the sources is very welcome and a very reasonable thing to do. And Lama Zopa Rinpoche here summarizes these sources for us. He only passed away in 2023, he's a early 21st, late 20th century master, and yet he's summarizing the things that are coming from 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, 1,500 years ago, and so forth for us, therefore allowing us to get a complex understanding or a full understanding of how meditation is used by Buddhists to train their minds, to become happier, and especially to eventually gain awakening. So that's another source that I recommend, sort of as a suggested reading. It also reads quite easily because it's well edited and so forth. So just something to play with if you feel like it. So the definition of meditation is this, and then therefore we can actually start thinking a tiny bit and asking ourselves, okay, if meditation is familiarizing my mind with something that is beneficial, if it's the process of habituating our mind to something that is good, if it's cultivating something good again in the field of the mind, what is it that I would like to cultivate? What is it that I would like to habituate my mind to? And there are no wrong answers necessarily. And of course, we will find it easier to answer when we identify some of the traditional lists that are offered in this regard. But before we go into those traditional lists, what I would invite is for you to just share some of your ideas on what qualities you would like to cultivate right here and now in the chat. So if something comes to mind, let's say peace or relaxation or concentration or kindness or compassion or anything like that, please take a mental note for yourself or take a note in the with a note-taking, device. Or note-taking means that you're using pen and paper or whatever it is that you're using for yourself for the future. That's great. But also, if you feel again like sharing your list of qualities or just one quality, two qualities, three qualities in the chat, something that speaks to your heart right now, as in, oh, I really need this, then that's also always inspirational to see. Yeah, great first point here in the chat. Kindness and resilience. Yes, very powerful. And I think this is where we can already see universally good. Kindness, of course, we can have different definitions of it and so forth, and we will have a whole separate class on it to unpack the Buddhist understanding of kindness. Kindness is kind of a universal virtue that is praised by all the traditions. And then resilience. Yeah, you can't really move forward without it. You can survive in this difficult world without it. So, absolutely. Focus and let's go in order. Clarity of mind, love, and kindness. Absolutely. Yes. Focus and presence, greater awareness, ability to listen to the world outside me and stop listening to myself all the time. Yes, very powerful. Kindness again, and you can see that there are recurring themes for all of us. True nature of reality. Yes, it would be fantastic to eventually understand that. Yes, for all of us. Wisdom, kindness, compassion, insight, attention, joy, kindness, openness, acceptance, and gratitude. Right. So, um, first of all, we're seeing recurring themes and the universality of it. Three more: love, peace, and equanimity. Yeah. And then we're also seeing that perhaps these qualities are kind of connected to each other, which is also a part of how the Buddhist tradition sees it all. Um, telling us essentially that all the positive qualities or positive inner skills, beneficial inner skills, meta skills, we could even say, they are all interconnected and they form a network within us. And within that network, each positive quality supports all the other positive qualities so that they're all working in symphony, bring a sense of well-being and happiness to ourselves and to those around us. And yeah, and we are also probably seeing that, at least that's true for me, that these qualities, there's nothing, inherently complicated about just mentioning them and saying, yeah, this is valuable. This is something that's great for humans to have, for me to have, for us to have as a culture, as a group, whatever it is that we're talking about. So they're not necessarily inviting much debate. And usually the problem, even though sometimes people would challenge these and, be boring and philosophical about it and saying, no, kindness is actually bad. And like, yes, that sometimes happens. But for most of us, there's less problem with the debate side of it and more we have some issues with how to cultivate that, how to maintain it, how to stay in it, how to live in it. And that's exactly where meditation comes in. Buddhism also has a very highly sophisticated tradition of debate and philosophical exploration and working with different philosophical positions in order to establish that view of interdependence and universal responsibility and universal compassion and so forth. But since this course is on meditation, what we're focusing on is indeed the techniques for maintaining, cultivating, and then expressing these beautiful states that we listed here in the chat. That's what meditation is for. And the other overall big thing that meditation is meant for is to help us become more happy. In a way, and this is where it's also meaningful to take a little historical tour, everything that we're going to be talking about, so the Indo-Tibetan tradition, arose from the insights of the historical Buddha. And I'm going to borrow a few words from one of my teachers, Venerable Rabina Kurtin, whom I have translated for many years and whose classes I also just enjoyed as a participant. And she always, when she delivers classes on Buddhism for beginners, which she's really great at, always says essentially that it's very important to remember that the Buddha was not a prophet, in that whatever he shared with the world was not revealed to him by someone, by some higher deity, or some cosmic forces or aliens or anything like that. What he was sharing was not revealed to him. It was a result of his systematic research. He researched the human mind. He researched his own mind. He looked deeply into his own mind in order to identify the causes of suffering and to figure out whether those causes of suffering could be removed. You could also say he was exploring the nature of happiness and trying to understand whether the causes of happiness could be thoroughly established in an irreversible way. And then he did some experiments, quite a lot of those. He played with his own mind, or he worked with his own mind, and he made a very powerful discovery called enlightenment. He discovered that our mind can be irreversibly transformed, and there are multiple strategies leading to that irreversible transformation. The irreversible transformation in which happiness is irreversibly established and suffering is irreversibly removed. And then, like any good scientist would do, he shared his discoveries with the world and said, "You don't have to believe me. You can use the same methods, the same techniques," and there's quite a lot of variation there for people of different temperaments. You can use these and make the same discoveries. And you don't have to believe me just because you respect me. He said that very clearly in some of his teachings. So, yeah, play with it if you feel like it. So he offered his discoveries to the world, and obviously, quite a few people did take him up on his offer, accept his teachings, and start practicing with him, and with his teachings, replicating the results of his experimentation. So they arrived at the same results or similar results through practicing, and that's how the Buddhist tradition was established. It was not just a gathering of people who believed the Buddha and then started praying to him even when he was alive. It was a group of people, and quite a large group, which included lay men, lay women, um, monastics, um, the monastic sangha of male monastics or female monastics. It was a large gathering of people who gathered around the Buddha because, yes, they saw the validity of what he was saying, but they also rediscovered for themselves the same psychological results. Sometimes after just hearing one verse from the Buddha and immediately applying it in practice, sometimes after a whole lifetime of practice. So that information on how to practice got transmitted further generation after generation. Eventually, it was written down in different languages, including Pali and Sanskrit. And on the basis of that information, eventually, great research universities were also established in ancient India. So these are the first universities we have in our world. Again, sometimes some places in the West claim that title for themselves in a very Eurocentric colonial manner. The earliest universities were probably these ones because they predate Christ, at least one of them, or very close to the lifetime of Jesus Christ. And so we have Takshashila, which is the earliest one. And then we have three very famous ones associated with Buddhism in particular, Nalanda, Vikramashila, and Adantapuri. And these three great universities, again, situated in different parts of the Indian subcontinent, were essentially three universities primarily focused on philosophy and psychology, and in particular, practical psychology. They also studied medicine. They studied astrology, which was a precursor to astronomy. They did certainly work with maths and so forth, but their primary emphasis was on practical transformative psychology. Essentially, they developed these extremely sophisticated psychological techniques for transforming the human mind by playing with what was transmitted from the times of the Buddha. And not only were they playing with the same techniques, the same practices, and developed some additional variations of those, they also created a very clear mapping, a very clear map of the human mind that we're working with in meditation or while playing with this Buddhist practical psychology. And now, in the 21st century, when we're having these big conferences in which modern scientists meet Buddhist contemplatives, and quite a lot of those conferences happen under the auspices of the Mind and Life Institute and are therefore known as Mind and Life conferences. When these conferences happen and when modern scientists offer their insights about the human mind and then want to hear from the Buddhist side, which some of them do at least, what the Buddhists primarily have to offer with regards to the human mind and how it's arranged and so forth still comes from the heritage of these great universities. So even though there were three, Nalanda, Vikramashila, and Dantapuri, His Holiness the Dalai Lama sometimes refers to the whole intellectual tradition that comes from there as the Nalanda tradition, because Nalanda as a university was sort of the primary one or the leading one. And you can still see its ruins not far from Bodh Gaya, which is the place in India where the Buddha got enlightened, and therefore a huge place for Buddhist pilgrimage. And you can see that it was a huge campus. It was an extremely large university with thousands of scholars working very intensely on these topics and fully focusing their entire lives on it, and then producing incredible insights, or at least incredible descriptions that we're still using to this day. So everything that we're talking about here comes from the Buddha, his followers, these great masters of the Nalanda tradition, and then the incredible masters also of the Tibetan tradition who inherited all of this, preserved it for us very carefully, and then shared it very openly when Tibet was occupied in 1959, and when some of them went into exile and started sharing this information with their students all across the globe. So this is the historical lineage for it all. Again, we can find sort of short summaries of all of this, or we can explore the great classics of this tradition, of which there are many, 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 many volumes. So in the Indo-Tibetan contemplative tradition, the words of the Buddha himself, or the words attributed to the Buddha in one way or another, are collected in 108 volumes. And that's the collection of the translated words of the Buddha, preserved in the Tibetan language. And then you have the works of the great Indian masters, so the masters of Nalanda and these other universities, in 220 volumes. And then on top of that, you have all the different commentaries that were written by Tibetans. And then you also have the books that were published after 1959 in different languages, English, French, Italian, and so forth. So that's an incredible richness, literary richness that we can play with and explore. And if you're an avid reader, well, do I have good news for you? If you're interested in all of this, you have quite a lot to read, right? But what we're doing is summarizing it all, putting it all into 6 classes and saying, hey, you don't have to read 108 volumes. You don't have to read 220 volumes. You don't have to read all of that, at least immediately. You can start meditating right now by looking at the quintessential insights. And one of these quintessential insights, again, a discovery made by the Buddha, is that happiness can be established, it can be cultivated, and can be uncovered. We can use different verbs here depending on which philosophical position we adopt. Or to put it even more simply, we can become happier, and we can even become ultimately happy. That's the discovery that the Buddha made. And in reverse, suffering can be alleviated, or the amounts of suffering that we're experiencing can be reduced, and then suffering eventually can be fully eliminated. That was the discovery that the Buddha made on the night of his enlightenment, that suffering can be fully removed, happiness can be fully uncovered or cultivated or, discovered, established, and therefore we can become very happy and not suffer at all. Well, that's great. While that is the eventual goal, initially we would like to at least become a tiny bit happier and maybe suffer a little bit less. And this is where we see that it's a gradient. It's not a switch where you are either extremely unhappy or you're completely free from suffering. You're moving in the direction of complete freedom by removing your suffering bit by bit. And equally with happiness, you're moving in the direction of ultimate happiness and bliss by establishing a happiness bit by bit, strengthening it. And to know what is it that we are expressing or discovering or establishing, we need to have a working definition of happiness, which fortunately the Buddhists do. And here's their definition: a state that we want to extend when it's present and to evoke when it's not yet there. Any state that falls under this definition, something that we want to extend when it's there and to evoke or to bring about when it's not there. Any state any experience, let's say, that falls under this definition is therefore a type of happiness. And so therefore there are many types of happiness, right? Sometimes when people hear this definition, it's a modern problem that I've discovered through social media. Sometimes when people see this definition, they say, well, then that means that something like eating ice cream is a type of happiness, and that's absurd. Well, it's not absurd. Eating ice cream, as long as you're enjoying it, is for you a process that facilitates the experience of happiness. Your pleasure from eating ice cream is a type of happiness. The thing is, it's not the only type of happiness. It's just one of them. And there are a trillion variations of happiness. There are a trillion types of pleasure, or at least there are a trillion triggers for our pleasure, right? But not all of them are created equal in that not all of them are equally stable. Not all of them are equally able to satisfy our deeper longings. Not all of them are also morally positive, and that sometimes people derive pleasure from things that are extremely harmful to others, and that's something to look at, right? So there are a trillion types of happiness, in a way, a trillion variations, shades of happiness, but they're not all equal to each other. They're quite different, and it is good to be looking at the different types of happiness that we aspire for or that we experience in order to figure out how to strengthen the more stable and wholesome ones and how to maybe avoid the ones that are destabilizing the flow of positive interdependence for us all. So that's the umbrella definition. Another thing that's always beneficial to look at, and that's something equally applicable to our exploration of all the traditions that came from Asia and its great spiritual culture, are again the original terms. So the Sanskrit and Pali term for happiness is sukha, which would be quite familiar probably to practitioners of yoga, hatha yoga in particular, because sometimes when we're doing our asana practice, we're told that our asanas should be sukha and sthira. So sthira means stable, and sukha means comfortable in that context. But sukha is a much larger term. It's not just comfortable; it can also denote happiness, bliss, well-being. All of these terms can be used to translate this Sanskrit and Pali term. And the Tibetan term is dewa, which is just the way Tibetans translated the term sukha. So these are just two words from different languages that in a particular Buddhist text would be used interchangeably depending on which language the text is in, right? But the term sukha in itself is very, very interesting in terms of its etymology, that is kind of now retroactively explored by Sanskritologists. And I apologize in advance to those who have heard this before, but I think it's something that is always very nice to revisit, and I enjoy revisiting it. So let's unpack the term sukha. There are two primary hypotheses that I have heard with regards to its meaning. So su means good, that or well, and that's fairly straightforward. So you find this little verbal root, this little root, and different terms and different Sanskrit words and so forth. It's just good. Good, well, that's okay. That's more or less straightforward. But ka, due to the shortness of it, is a much more ambiguous root. And the general consensus that I've seen is that it denotes space. So su and ka together would literally mean something like good space, right? And so happiness is therefore good space, which that in itself is quite nice. Being in a good mental space is what happiness is, or a good experiential space, you could say. And it would be especially nice if we could abide in that good experiential space all the time, not allowing the waves of human suffering, waves of impermanence, waves of all the trash that's happening in the world to destabilize this good experience for us. That would be good, So that's sukha on the more surface level. But here's how experts then sometimes unpack it. So one unpacking comes from Robert Svoboda, whose work some of you might be familiar with. He is a doctor of Ayurveda. I think actually the first Westerner to be fully certified as an Ayurvedic doctor in Pune and the Institute of Ayurveda there, and also expert on the Indian traditions, on the traditions of Indian Tantra, or Indian non-Buddhist Tantra in particular. So he sometimes says that sukha, yes, is good space, meaning that it's a space of experience, or it's an experiential space in which everything is flowing nicely and harmoniously. And that includes the flow of our pranas, our inner energies. That includes the flow of our karmas, our habitual imprints that give rise to experience. That includes the flow of outer reality as well. So if we are somehow able to arrange our inner and outer reality so that everything flows harmoniously and we are therefore feeling good, that's sukha. The opposite of it is dukkha. Du means bad, so that's bad space. And dukkha is a space in which things are not flowing nicely, and we're experiencing all sorts of discomfort, and we're unhappy, and we don't like that, you know. So that's suffering, that's dukkha or discomfort. So when things are flowing nicely and there is a flow to it, which is harmonious, no one is talking about something static and unchanging. No, there is a flow, but it's harmonious and therefore it's good and we're enjoying it. That's sukha. And if the flow is kind of trashy, it's not good and we are not feeling good because of it, that's dukkha, suffering. So we want to remove dukkha and we want to cultivate or establish sukha. That's our natural predisposition as sentient beings. Buddhists, especially in the Nalanda tradition, actually say that we have this category called basic goodness or Buddha nature. We have something deep within us that is like an incredible treasure, replete with all the positive qualities. Or at least we have the seeds of all the positive qualities within us. That's a hypothesis here until we prove it, right? So that working hypothesis that Buddhists established, this hypothesis of Buddha nature, basic goodness, called also Buddha nature theory in modern studies sometimes, also says that a fundamental property of this Buddha nature is to always propel us towards happiness and away from suffering, in that we have this wish, I want to be happy and I want to avoid suffering. The problem is we're confused, and although we have these fundamental instincts to seek happiness and to avoid suffering, we get confused about how to establish happiness and avoid suffering. And under the influence of that confusion, we make everything very messy. And that's where we're at right now, individually and collectively. We are trying to find happiness, but just really confused, to put it very mildly. And that's why we do need things like meditation to establish greater clarity. So we want to move in the direction of this positive space where everything is flowing nicely. So that's one understanding, a space in which karmas, pranas, everything is flowing harmoniously. Another interpretation or another explanation of the same thing is something that I've learned from the Buddhist scholar from Japan by the name of Taitetsu Unno, who was also a priest of the Pure Land tradition in Buddhism, the Jodo Shinshu tradition in particular. And he, in one of his books on the Pure Land tradition, unpacks a slightly more specific interpretation of the term sukha, in which ka is not just any space. It's not just space in general. It's in particular, within the Buddhist tradition, the hole in the middle of a wheel. So you have a wheel, imagine a wheel from 2,500 years ago from the times of the Buddha. It was nothing like, well, it was also round and it could turn, but it was not fancy looking and covered with rubber and all of that, which we have now is just let's say a wheel made from wood, and in the middle of that wheel you would have a hole, and through that hole the axis would go so that the wheel would turn around something. So if that hole is made well, su, the wheel will turn nicely, and that's the will of our experience, the will of our existence, the will of our life. When we are in a state of sukha, that wheel is flowing, turning smoothly. When we are in a state of dukkha, because that hole was made incompetently, the will is not turning well. And that's probably where we are finding ourselves oftentimes. We can, on each given day, ask ourselves, that's actually a good way to contemplate this. Am I more in a state of harmonious turning of the will, or is the will of my experiences today turning in a very, very problematic manner? Am I feeling like I'm getting a rain of abundance and prosperity and happiness today? Or does it feel like just, you know, trash is falling onto my plate, the plate of my experiences? Like, oh, this bad experience and that's bad experience, and the coffee wasn't right, and then someone yelled at me, and then, it's like one suffering, one cause of suffering, one trigger for suffering after another. So these are the sukha and dukkha. And then, of course, the Buddhist working hypothesis here is that through working with meditation, and meditation is supported by other things, but through working with meditation in particular, we can gradually make that hole in the middle of the wheel better, so that the stream of our experiences is more sukha and less dukkha. Very clear. So that's the thing that we're aspiring for: well-being and happiness. And when it comes to the trillion shades of happiness, there are two primary types that we need to understand in order to work with meditation in a truly sustainable and inspired manner. Again, there are trillion individual shades, trillion individual triggers for happiness. Again, ice cream, we could be listing all of them, if we wanted to do something, slightly silly. Yes, chocolate ice cream is a cause of happiness, and happiness from chocolate ice cream is a type of, and we could go through that list and it would never end because hedonically there are so many different things that could trigger happiness. But just listing them wouldn't really help. What is helpful, though, is that is identifying these two primary types of happiness, in which one sometimes comes in as a surprise for us. So one type of happiness is the happiness that comes from outer stimulation, and in the Greek intellectual tradition, that was called hedonic, which is still the term we use pretty universally across our post-Greco-Roman Judeo-Christian, westernized cultures. We say hedonic when we talk about the creature comforts that we experience in, let's say, having a nice cup of tea, lying down on our bed, covering ourselves with warm blankets, watching a nice movie, and so forth. That's hedonic. Pleasure you derive from having a nice conversation with friends because it's intellectually stimulating, or they're just listening to you attentively while having a nice meal, also hedonic. Even the pleasure you get from, let's say, trekking for a long time in the Himalayas, and then seeing the beautiful views of the mountain range of Annapurna or something like that. That would also have a hedonic element to it, even though there is also an element of inner happiness in there as well, which we can uncover and strengthen. So many, many types of hedonic happiness. The Buddhist tradition sometimes identifies four primary sources of hedonic pleasure. And these are sensory stimulation. So anything pleasant within the fields of the five senses, pleasant sounds, pleasant visual objects. We like looking at pretty people, and we don't like to look at pictures of dog poop, let's say. That's a type of stimulation. Smells, tastes, and tactile sensations, which also includes sex, which is sort of stimulating us primarily through the tactile field, even though not exclusively. So the pleasant types of stimulation in those five fields, that's one cause. Then you have the pleasure of owning something, possessing something, knowing that you have a certain amount of money in your bank account, or that you own these beautiful things around you that you can play with, or that you have property, or whatever it is. Just knowing that something belongs to you, you have that available to you as a resource. That's another source of hedonic happiness. Then you have the pleasant words of others. But in this day and age, it's not just words, it's also the non-verbal virtual signals that we get through things like likes, little hearts that people send us on social media, and so forth. These are all under that category of essentially receiving compliments, or as they call it historically, receiving praise. And then the most subtle of the four is reputation. Just knowing that people think highly of us, that they do respect us, that they think we're cool and funny and nice and interesting or expert at whatever it is that we're doing. So all of that. So that's the most subtle one because, first of all, it takes a certain amount of inner sophistication to appreciate that compared to the other things. It takes a certain amount of sophistication to establish that for ourselves. And if we were to reverse the thing, it would take a really extremely adept mind to get over our attachment to that one. They say that that's the most subtle object of our attachment with regards to the four. And to get over that attachment would be extremely difficult. It is sometimes easier, at least for some of us, to give up the creature pleasures, at least temporarily, for the sake of something. We can even go to, let's say, a mountain cave to practice, and there we will not have possessions, and we will not be receiving praise from others, at least actively. But they say even a yogi, it's another Tibetan proverb, even a yogi in the cave on the side of the mountain might still be thinking, oh, I hope those people in the village down the hill think I'm great. I hope they're thinking I'm a real practitioner. So that's a really subtle thing that leaves last if we work against it. But these four together are described as the primary sources of hedonic stimulation that we are attached to. And the Buddhist tradition refers to them as the four worldly concerns or the eight worldly concerns because they're also paired with their opposites. So we want to have pleasant types of stimulation. We want to avoid the unpleasant types of stimulation. We want to have possessions. We don't want to suffer loss. We want to hear nice words and get likes. We don't like it when people blame us or say mean things to us or send little angry faces. Um, Especially under our selfies or whatever. And then with reputation, we want good reputation. We don't want to have bad reputation. We really sometimes don't like to know that others despise us, hate us, think we're trash, and think we're incompetent, and so forth. So these are the eight worldly concerns. Why are they called that? Or the eight worldly dharmas. Why are they called that? Because we're concerned with them. Why are we concerned with them? Because we think these are the primary causes of happiness. And this is all not, a random tangent. This has to do with meditation. When we use meditation only as an aid to getting the first four and avoiding the other four, we are really kind of not using it very properly, to be honest. And that it can help us with enjoying our cheese and wine more. It can. It can help us with earning more money. It absolutely can, in that our mind becomes more focused and we can perform better at work. And that's how the global mega corporations started using meditation and even offering meditation and mindfulness courses to their employees, not out of genuine care for their well-being, but only in terms of milking more money out of people. But so it can serve all that. It can also make us more likely to receive compliments because we're becoming more peaceful, and smiley and all that, and people like that. And it can also create some reputation for us, which is why the field of teaching meditation is such a minefield in terms of potentially getting lost in all of that and completely missing out on the spiritual side of it and actually becoming attached to in a ghoulish way to creating a false reputation for ourselves. And oh, people think I'm a meditation teacher, even though I'm not really qualified. I will pretend to be, and then people will, I don't know, give me their money and sign up for my courses. Really a minefield from a Buddhist point of view, all that. So meditation can be used for all of that. But then what about the other type of happiness? What about enlightenment? What about, anything that transcends these four or these eight? That's outside of our scope of attention if we are fully lost in the eight worldly concerns. And that's where the Indo-Tibetan tradition in particular says, no, it's fine to have all those nice things as long as they're morally balanced and are not harmful to others. But then you have to look beyond them, this other type of happiness that comes from within. And the Greeks call that eudaimonic, which is a very nice term, so we can use that. In Tibetan, it's called yang dakpe dewa, which is genuine happiness, literally translates into genuine happiness. And then you have similar terms in Sanskrit, satsukha, samyak sukha, all about genuine well-being. Genuine in that it's not dependent on the fleeting factors on the outside. What does it depend on? It depends on something on the inside, within our mind. Within our field of awareness. And so eudaimonic happiness is a happiness that comes from a balanced state of mind and from the mind's positive qualities, or in a deeper way, on its true nature. So again, if we're working closely with that Buddha nature theory, this hypothesis that says that all the good things are already within us, either as a seed or in their fully manifest form, which some interpretations of Buddha nature theory say, then our job is really to just uncover that or to get to those seeds and help them grow more fully. But in either case, it's all within the mind. It's not in our bank account. It's not in that cheese. It's not in that wine. It's not in those likes. It's not even in what other people think of us. And here, when this kind of system of happiness is presented, the idea is, again, not to fully abandon the worldly aspects of happiness and the hedonic happiness, but to make sure we're starting to slowly pay attention to this eudaimonic one, and then we're slowly starting to expand its role in our life. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama was once asked about how to prioritize the two, how to distribute our time between the worldly and the spiritual, we could say. And he said, well, as a beginner, you would probably, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but these are the numbers that he gave. As a beginner, you're probably looking at something like 90 to 10. You're still 90%, since 90% of your energy and time still goes into earning a living, taking care of your family, eating, sleeping, all of these things, which are necessary for survival. But maybe you will find 10% in there somewhere to start allocating for these spiritual activities. And spiritual here just means related to this inner growth or the cultivation of inner well being. That's a good start. And then eventually, if you work with it in a systematic, thorough manner and you master these inner disciplines, you might be looking at something like 50 to 50. And something to add, and this is added from my side, not this is the end of quote, or end of paraphrase. And this is something to add from my side. It becomes 50-50, not just because you're spending, let's say, 7 hours of your waking time practicing meditation and 7 hours earning a living or something like that. It's not just that. It becomes 50-50 because you also learn the techniques that allow you to transform all of your ordinary activity into spiritual practice, into the practice of cultivation. And all of the Buddhist traditions, including the Indo-Tibetan one, have many, 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 many suggestions on how to do that, how to transform even such activities as visiting the toilet, taking a shower, making food, consuming that food, talking to others, and so forth, into types of meditation, meaning into activities that help us strengthen the positive qualities. So as we master these disciplines, everything becomes meditation in a way, and therefore it becomes a 50-50 combination. And it can even become 90-10, where 10% of our time is spent sort of on just taking care of the hedonic happiness, and then 90% is transformed into spiritual practice. But that's really for adepts or for those who have really took a deep dive into all of this. But it's doable, and it was done in the past. And it's not only done through retreating into a cave and practicing there single pointedly, which is one strategy that's taught by this tradition. It can also be done by just transforming everything we do into practice. And that's been done by numerous masters of the past. So the Indo-Tibetan tradition actually is a really precious source of wisdom in that it, amongst other things, one reason is that it contains this heritage of the great Indian universities and all the incredibly advanced techniques that it developed. Another reason is that it also includes the heritage of the 84 great tantric masters of ancient India, sometimes referred to as the great Mahasiddhas. And they were the great, incredible male and female practitioners of the past who, staying outside of the university context or leaving the university context, worked with their mind directly by using very advanced meditation techniques, and sometimes while violating social norms or expectations that society had for them, and at the same time achieving incredible levels of inner cultivation. So that's another thing that was incorporated into the Tibetan tradition and actually serves as the very heart of its practice approach. And at the intersection of these two, the intellectual tradition of Nalanda and the practice tradition of the 84 Mahasiddhas, and some people were both masters of Nalanda and Tantric Mahasiddhas. In the intersection of these two, we find an incredible array of role models. So for some traditions across the world, they would put primary emphasis on monastic practice, for example, which is great and fantastic. But then if you are a lay person, especially, let's say, a lay mother who's actively taking care of children, you look at these stories of great monastic practitioners of the past and you say, well, that's nice, but where's the representation? Who would resonate with me? I cannot be a monastic right now. Or, well, if I left my children, I'd be quite judged by society, even though for men that was okay. That's what the Buddha did. He left his newborn son and went to practice and then came back to him and got the son enlightened as well. But, like, I can't do that, so I need other role models. Well, the Indo-Tibetan tradition has many of those of every walk of life. You have kings attaining enlightenment while still being kings. You have, blacksmiths and fishermen and people who were squeezing oil out of sesame seeds, and monastics of every variety and kind, and people who were monastics first and then were no longer monastics, yada, yada, yada. So many role models. So that's another great thing about it. And what is common to all of them is that they were all using meditation to discover happiness. And they were putting greater and greater emphasis as their lives unfolded on the eudaimonic inner well-being, the one that comes from within. Another thing to know about this eudaimonic well-being as we consider it and we try to incorporate it into our life is that it's described as something that is radiated from within towards others. Hedonic happiness is something that comes from the outside into us and is then consumed within us. quite literally by us eating ice cream or enjoying nice music or having any of these other things that come from the outside in. Hedonic happiness comes from the outside in. And if we're not suffering from any problems with regards to experiencing hedonic happiness, we would consume that ice cream, experience some pleasure. Okay, that's it. The eudaimonic one comes from our inner qualities and, in a way, even from the true nature of our mind, radiates outwards and is then brought into the world and shared with the world. And we experience joy in that process of sharing. So it's intimately related to generosity, which is why generosity is sometimes quoted as the easiest example for teaching the concept of eudaimonic happiness to children, where with a child, you bring their attention to the joy they experienced when giving a gift, as opposed to the joy they experienced when receiving the gift. The joy of receiving a gift is hedonic. Nothing wrong with that. Nice to get gifts. But there's also joy of giving the gift and seeing another person light up as a result of that and be happy. And the joy we derive from that is eudaimonic. So that's a simple example. So as we develop these eudaimonic qualities and this eudaimonic well-being, something gets radiated outwards. So now that we've discovered or explored this, let's do another meditation. And in this meditation, let's try to incorporate these ideas of hedonic and eudaimonic happiness into our essentially plan making or aspiration building. So this particular practice is a practice that was designed by Dr. Alan Wallace, again, one of my primary teachers, as a practice that combines loving kindness, on which we will have a whole class, with um, an exploration of our cognitive domain, as it's called in psychology. Our desires, wishes, aspirations, plan, wishes, that's all called cognitive in psychology, related to conation or desire making, will, volition. And so in this practice, we explore our volition, and at the same time, we wish for ourselves to be happy, and then for others to be happy, which is loving kindness, the wish for someone to be happy and have the causes of happiness. So it's a dual practice. And in this practice, while we're doing that, exploring for questions that are brought to our mind there, let's try to remember that there's not just the hedonic, there's also this eudaimonic aspect to life, which we can explore even if we haven't before. Before we meditate, though, please feel free to stretch, move around, do a little victory dance, whatever is needed, drink some tea, whatever is needed to make your body comfortable when you meditate. So let's take 60 seconds or so to do that, then adopt a comfortable stationary position, and then start the meditation itself. And so finding a comfortable stationary position when we're ready, and first spending some time with the body by identifying its sensations, observing them, and also adjusting the parts of the body if necessary. If we are in the upright position, maybe gently elongating our spine, relaxing the shoulders, making sure our chin is level with the floor and then slightly tucked in. The tip of our tongue is resting on our upper palate behind the teeth. Our eyes are either closed or hooded or fully open, and our gaze is then just resting in the space in front of us. If we are in a sitting position, our hands can be comfortably placed on our thighs or knees with the palms down, or we can use one of the gestures of concentration. For example, by putting our right hand over our left hand and then making sure our thumbs are touching each other, forming the shape similar to the shape of a drop of water or candle flame. And all of that resting over our lap. And then we just bring our awareness to the body to initiate the process of relaxation. Spending some time with our feet and toes and releasing all the tension from that area while noticing the sensations. And then our legs in general. The area of the pelvic floor and the buttocks. The abdomen, the lower back, the space of the torso. Shoulders, arms and hands, and then eventually our facial muscles. Allowing our body to continue resting in a state of relative stillness while our breath moves naturally without any conscious control from our side, with our body choosing its own rhythm, its own volume, its own speed of breathing. Our speech resting in a state of silence, effortlessly. Our mind present with the experiences of the body. And then for the main part of this practice, present with the 4 questions that we allow our mind to explore. The first of these questions is, how do I envision genuine well-being, genuine happiness that I would like to eventually realize? What would that look like? And this is where we can remember to also think of the eudaimonic. It's not just about the outer situation that we eventually want to find ourselves in. It's also about our inner state. What does that inner state need to be for us to experience genuine sukha, good space, a harmonious turning of the wheel. Allowing our mind to respond with a general vision, a general understanding, a general idea, which doesn't have to be very detailed yet, unless it is. And then responding to that with the aspiration of loving kindness for ourselves, with the wish, may it be so. May I realize genuine well being. Generating that wish, resting with that wish, strengthening that wish with each new exhalation. And if we want, even imagining that with each new exhalation, we are sort of breathing life into this vision, making it more and more real for ourselves. And if we wish for a moment, even imagining that we have arrived there, that we are in that state of well being and happiness, what would that feel like? This brings us to the second question. In order to realize this genuine well being, what types of support, what types of resources do we need to receive from the world around us? From other people, from communities, from the universe itself? What types of support and help do I need? Once we have some general idea, some basic answer to this question, we respond to that with loving kindness, with a wish, may it be so. May I receive and accept all of these types of help, all of these types of assistance. And if we wish, imagining that we're drawing them closer and closer to us with each new inhalation, bringing them into the field of our experiences. And then for a moment, even imagining that it did happen, we do now have all of these types of support, the ones that we truly need. For the third question, asking ourselves, how do I need to change and transform to arrive at genuine well being? And then, may it be so. Resting in this wish of loving kindness for ourselves, and even imagining that with each new cycle of breathing, we are slowly transforming, uncovering our true potential more and more. Eventually, imagining that we have indeed transformed, that it did happen for us. And finally, asking ourselves, within this vision of genuine well being, true happiness, what gift would I like to share with others and with the world? May it be so. Maintaining the wish and imagining, if we want, with each outbreath, offering this gift to others and therefore transforming the overall flow of interdependence for all of us. For a few moments, imagining that we have been able to transform ourselves and all of reality through this process, bringing in more and more of these inner types of happiness, the eudaimonic qualities that affect everything. including the hedonic field. And then releasing all of our thoughts, all of our aspirations, images, and so on, to just rest in a state of open-ended clarity, clarity without a particular reference point. Dedicating the energy of our practice to the realization of all of these beautiful aspirations. May it contribute to just that. Coming back to the body and very slowly at our own pace, introducing some movements to the body. Rocking back and forth, stretching our neck, opening our eyes, re-engaging our vision, moving our fingers and toes, and slowly arriving at our shared space. Thank you. So we have about 20 minutes left, and a few more things to discuss. But for the period after that, um, we do have sort of a homework, and that is just to meditate. And the three guided practices that I can offer in this case as links are here in the chat. These are all links to Insight Timer because I think these days you can listen to it in the browser or using the Insight Timer app or whichever way you prefer. And there's no ads, unlike on YouTube and on some other platforms, which is slightly refreshing. And so there are the first practice is the very first practice we did today, which is settling our body, speech, and mind, basically just relaxing deeply so that we can then practice. That's something to play with. And that in itself is a relaxation practice. So that's always good, especially if we are feeling tired and tense. And then the other two links are to this very practice that we did just now, the fourfold vision quest. One is shorter, and that's with my narration, and the other one is with a narration from Dr. Alan Wallace, who crafted this particular combination of techniques for us. So that's a more elaborate recording, and you're very welcome to play with whichever one, or to guide yourself in these practices if you prefer, just setting a timer and doing it in a self-guided manner. But one thing that some people like to do after doing this fourfold vision quest practice is doing some journaling on it, essentially, and taking sort of a little written snapshot of your current answers to these questions. What is genuine well-being for you right now? And uh, what is it that what types of support do I truly need from the world around me? Then how world around me. I'm just dropping the questions into the chat also for journaling if you like. What types of support do I need from the world around me? That's the second one. How do I need to transform to, meaning to become genuinely happy or more happy? And finally, what gift would I like to offer? Do I envision a genuine way? And while we are answering it, over time, we might see that there's an evolution to our answers. Well, we will see. We actually will see that the answers are different each time you do a meditation. Even if you do it two times in a row, your answers would be slightly different. So that's obvious. But what I'm saying is there's also a general evolution sometimes in that the eudaimonic does start to become a bit more important, and then again a bit more important, and then again a bit more important. And this is not to say it should fully replace the hedonic. No, we do need food and meaningful companionship and education and access to medicine and whatnot. It's just that it can all become infused with a wish to also have these inner states of satisfaction and joy and well-being. And the thing with the hedonic is that, again, in itself, nothing wrong with it. And as long as we have human bodies or bodies of any kind, really, we do need something hedonic. to survive. And the Buddha actually had a lot of ideas on how a truly civilized society would be providing hedonic goods to all of its members equally, meaning to it would give people access to food and clothing and shelter and so forth. And that's the mark of a civilized society, you know. So Buddhism has plenty of ideas on that and social justice. But beyond that, once we have reached a certain level of access to hedonic goods, are we becoming more happy? Are we happier if we have 2 billion as opposed to 1 billion? Are we happier if we have 100 million as opposed to 1 billion? Well, no, not unless we are cultivating deeper degrees of eudaimonic well-being. And actually, towards that extreme wealth is an obstacle. They sometimes say in the Buddhist tradition, pray to not be born in a wealthy family, or don't pray to be born in a wealthy family. Wealthy meaning extreme wealth, not family with access, not middle class. You know, middle class is not wealthy by comparison. You know, but if you are born into extreme wealth, it's quite unlikely that just the hedonic will obscure the eudaimonic from you, and you will be just going through the card deck of the hedonic, trying this and then trying that and then trying that and then trying that, and never stopping to ask yourself, oh, well, maybe there's this other type of happiness, which is the one we've been looking at. So, how do we cultivate this? Buddhism has many different descriptions, many models that are complementary and are all pointing at the same thing. But the overall working hypothesis for how to cultivate this inner well-being is this. The main way, I'm just reading from the slide here, the main way to strengthen eudaimonic well-being up to its immeasurable level, which from this psychological point of view is definitely possible, is to strengthen the positive mental states, or as they're called more technically in this psychology of Nalanda University and the other great universities of India, the positive mental factors or functions. In Tibetan, they're called semjung. So these are also translated as subsidiary awarenesses. And basically, these are the little working parts of our mind that correspond to different mental states. For example, love or kindness, compassion, patience, mental clarity, intelligence, and so forth. They're all little workers within our minds. So the positive ones amongst them, to the degree that we're able to strengthen them, would be generating a state of well-being just because they're there and because they're active and they're doing their job. Through them being there, through them being harmoniously interwoven with each other, and through them working, we by default are already resting in a state of eudaimonic well-being. If they're not there, or if they're not cultivated, if they're not strong enough, or if they're obscured by something, or if they're hijacked by something. For example, our compassion can be hijacked by extreme ignorance about how things work and therefore turn into what's known as the idiot compassion, in which we're trying to do what's best, but are actually harming everyone and ourselves in the process, you know. So if they're hijacked, then they're not generating happiness, and quite likely they're also even serving the dukkha, because the negative mental states, the problematic mental factors within our mind are working actively, making us see reality incorrectly and bringing us suffering. So how do we strengthen them? How do we uncover these positive mental states? Different types of meditation are amongst the most important tools for strengthening such states. Not just meditation, of course, because we also strengthen them through practice. By doing compassionate actions, we are strengthening compassion. Or also therapy, physical practices of different kinds, physical disciplines, such as the physical aspects of yoga and Tai Chi and so forth. Even the gym, that's what people say these days. Oh, gym is my therapy. That's not a completely crazy statement at all, because if the gym helps us focus and concentrate and be present and drop the troubling thoughts and maybe even have a sense of community with other people there, to kind of feel our common humanity or chat with other people and see what they're going through, that's a totally helpful space, which will also help us cultivate these positive mental states. But meditation plays a special role in all of that, at least for Buddhism and for other spiritual disciplines, because it is forcing us or making us or inviting us to focus specifically on the strengthening of these positive mental factors, and also to learn to identify them within the soup that is our mind, and to learn, and then we learn how to strengthen each one individually or in symphony. So deliberate familiarization to these states or their cultivation is meditation. And remember, I mentioned that we're also sort of drawing a line between what's meditation and what's not meditation from the Buddhist point of view. Well, if you open a platform like Insight Timer, which is where these guided recordings are hosted, you will see that there are now maybe more than a million, a few million meditation. I don't know, hundreds of thousands at least, different practices there. Many, 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 because people are uploading so much every day. And if we had the time and the energy and the money to go through all of them just listening to one by one, we'd probably see that a lot of them don't qualify as meditation under this definition. Not because Lobsang Tenpa said so or anyone else or Buddhism came in and said, well, it's like in a sort of morally judgmental way. No, it's just definition. Is it in accordance with it or is it not? Some practices, we would say, are actually not strengthening the positive mental states. They're actually, in reality, strengthening something that is unwholesome. For example, our neurotic attachment to reputation or wealth or different fantasies about hedonic well-being. If a practice is strengthening those things as opposed to the wholesome mental factors, then it doesn't qualify from a Buddhist point of view as meditation. It qualifies as fantasies, dreaming, whatever it is, but not as meditation. Of course, in the secular world where we're not bound specifically to the Buddhist definition, we can say whatever we want. But then it's still good to have that discernment and ask ourselves, is this going to be helpful if I listen to it at all? Is the people, are the people guiding it qualified? Is the practice itself valid? What is it going to do to my mind in the long term and even in the short term? And this is where this Nalanda tradition steps in and says, well, we need to be very clear with all of that and look at it and be like scientists who are analyzing what seeds would give rise to what fruit or to what plants that then would bear fruit. So this is what's explored in this Buddhist psychological tradition. So amongst the different positive mental factors that we might strengthen in our mind, we find such things as faith, integrity, regard for others, non-attachment, non-hatred, non-confusion, joyful effort, pliancy, conscientiousness, non-harmfulness, and equanimity. And this is a list of the most important positive mental factors that is given in the Buddhist technical psychological teachings known in Tibetan as Lorig, or mind and awareness, or cognizers and awareness. This is a list that is not exhaustive. These are not all the positive mental states that exist. These are just seen as the most important ones or indispensable ones on the path to enlightenment within the Buddhist tradition. So without these, there's no enlightenment. You have to have these to a certain degree, all of them. But there are many, many more. And also sometimes they combine with each other and produce a third one. So they're just like with our problematic mental states, there are so many positive ones, but these ones Buddhist psychology is historically described as the most important ones. And we will definitely see how some of these play out in different practices that we're going to explore in this course. For now, it's just an example of a list of different positive things that we could be cultivating. But there are also secular examples, like the list of virtues that Benjamin Franklin famously made for himself, trying to train in each one for a week and then moving on to the next one and then moving through those in a circle. And there are, of course, different religious and philosophical lists of virtues that we find across the different traditions. And there's always an overlap because kindness is kind of always praised, compassion is always praised. So we'll see that there's universality there, but also we are very free to use whatever list works for us. For now, because we're talking about the Indo-Tibetan tradition, we will play with some of the qualities that are described in it. And we'll start unpacking these in our future classes. But before we conclude, more of a technical thing to share, or two technical things. One thing that we will explore in this course are the two types of meditation that are often both present within one specific method that we're using. One type of meditation is known as the stabilizing meditation, or sthapya bhavana, holding the mind on one object. That's a process that we do with our mind when we tie our mind to something and we rest there. And the other one, and that's the one that, again, in the West is not always understood or seen by people, at least who are not deeply familiar with meditation, is the analytical meditation. The meditation in which we use our ability to dissect, to analyze, to understand, to look deeply into something. So here it means going through a logical sequence in order to activate a specific mental state. So the Tibetan Buddhist tradition describes these as the two primary types of meditation. We could say there are two types of meditation, and there are thousands, if not tens of thousands, of individual techniques or practices. So loving kindness, let's say, is one of the practices. But within loving kindness, while we're cultivating loving kindness, we're using both the stabilizing meditation and the analytical meditation. And depending on which type of loving kindness we're doing, the percentage of stabilizing versus analytical would be different. And we'll learn to discern that in each practice that we do later in the course. For the practice that we did just now with the four questions, we did the analytical when we were finding the answers to the four questions, or at least some general vision. And then we used the stabilizing when we were resting with the wish, may it be so, when we were just activating loving kindness and trying to rest in it. So we will see more examples of this later in the course. And another technical consideration here, which is just important for building a good session. We will unpack this in greater depth in the next class. But generally, it's said that when we're doing any meditation, even if it's just for 5 minutes, there are some great tips from the great masters of the past on how to get as much benefit out of that session as possible. And these great tips boil down to the three excellences, as they're sometimes known, which are excellent preparation, excellent main part, and excellent conclusion. The most important one to focus on right now for us is the excellent preparation, because it means that we're preparing for meditation and then we're actually turning on the guided recording or we're starting the timer. The first point is that if we wish and if we have access to that, we can prepare the outer space. If we're meditating on a train or on a plane or in our office toilet, which some people do, obviously we don't have much control over the outer environment. But if it is our space, let's say our apartment, our room, our house, whatever it is, we might, if we wish, rearrange things, change the lighting, light some candles, whatever it is that we want to do with the environment to make sure it's inspiring and that it feels clean enough for us to not suffer from being there. So that's the first thing that's done. And the key point of the body is to relax the body deeply. That's why we've been doing these body scans in which we gradually release tension from each part. That's a great way to do it. And just resting in stillness then. The key point of the speech is to let it rest in natural silence while our breath is moving naturally. Breath here is included in this category of speech because they're deeply related to each other, obviously. And so in some systems, we're invited to first do a special breathing exercise to release some of the stale energies from our body, some of the stale pranas. And some, we're just invited to start breathing naturally, releasing control as much as possible and letting the body do what it wants with the breath on its own. So that's all under this large category of speech. And then for the mind, two important parts there. One is to let the mind be in the present moment. So we're consciously releasing different concerns, if possible, to the degree that's possible. And then another part, and that's very important for the Tibetan tradition and is not always emphasized in other lineages, establishing a good motivation. Thinking of the highest aspirations we have for well-being, for happiness, for inner cultivation, and saying, this is why I'm practicing. This is what I'm practicing for. In the long run, may my practice contribute to that. Practitioners of Tibetan Buddhism, proper people who identify as Tibetan Buddhists and practice within the fold of that tradition, practice in order to gain awakening for the benefit of all sentient beings, to get enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. That's their main motivation that they use in every session of practice until they get enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. So that's the main one. But if we don't yet resonate with that wording, or we just don't resonate with it at all, period, we find a wording that works for us. And it might be, I'm practicing just to become a kinder, wiser person, or to uncover greater degrees of kindness and wisdom. Perfectly valid, and anything of that nature, something that is vast, something that ideally goes beyond just the stress release, even though stress release is also important. That's pretty great already. So doing that, aspiring for that and saying, hey, my practice, may it contribute to that. That's the last part of the preparation. With that, we go into the meditation practice itself. That's the excellent main part, performing the chosen practice while trying to avoid distractions and follow the instructions well. So that means that if we're using a guided recording, that's where we press play, unless that recording in itself includes the preparation, which For my meditations, most of them do. For some other meditations, they might not. So we just have to figure it out. After we've listened to a recording, we would know. And so we just listen to that recording, doing the practice as best as we can. Great, as well as we can. That's the excellent main part. And then the excellent conclusion, which is also sometimes already included in some of the recordings, is dedicating the effort from our practice to our highest aspirations and then reactivating the body. So we concluded the practice, we've meditated on the breath for 5 minutes, for example, and we say mentally, may this energy or the merit or whatever, the positive force of my practice bring this result about or contribute to awakening for all sentient beings, if that's our motivation, or contribute to everyone becoming kinder and wiser. And these dedications, it's good if they are connected to our initial motivation. And it's also good if they're universal. They're not just about us. Yes, I do want to become more wise, more kind. Well, may everyone do just that, become more wise and kind. And this is where we can also add our personal aspirations for world peace and any of these beautiful goals that are so important. We're adding energy to the interdependence that underpins them. That's what Buddhists think about the efficiency of the dedications. They do slowly change outer reality as well. That's the Buddhist working hypothesis again. And then we reactivate the body, which means we start stretching, moving around, rocking back and forth, opening our eyes and all that. And slowly, slowly, at our own pace, we transition back into the more active mode. Of course, if we're interrupted by a phone call or someone walks in and needs our immediate attention, then what to do? But if we are not experiencing that type of outer pressure, it's good to transition out of meditation very gently, sort of as if waking up, even though hopefully we were not falling asleep during the practice and there was sufficient clarity in there. So these are just some technical details that are explained again by the masters of the Indo-Tibetan tradition to help us get the maximum benefit out of each session of practice that we do. So when you're playing with your meditations between now and our class next week, if you want to use these points, excellent preparation, excellent main part, and excellent conclusion, and especially the preparation part, which kind of is divided into those 4 categories, great. And if not, do what works for you. Enjoy a meditation, and we'll see each other in 1 week to continue practicing. But I will be very curious to learn about your practice over the course of this week. So if you want to take some notes on it, record your experiences, see if there's anything that comes up, and just see whether it's easy to meditate every day, which it's not, of course, but if anything inspires you and helps you, and then you can share that with others as in what helps you maintain a daily practice. That's something that we will have some time for as well. So thank you very much for your attention and for being here. Deep bows to all of you and to the Sangye Yoga School for hosting us. We'll see each other in 1 week and just be well. Bye-bye. Thank you so much.